So this is a presentation that I hope you're expecting, which is all about how to make a Tier 4 general student visa application outside the UK. So this is the kind of visa that you're going to need to come and study at SOAS in September. And my name is John Hitchman. I'm the Student Advisor Immigration and Finance, and a large part of my role here at SOAS is to advise students about immigration and about travelling in and out of the UK and about the kind of visas that you need to do that and how you apply for those visas. And we've got a URL there. On that URL you can find a lot of useful resources to help you with this visa application. So we've got guidance that kind of covers in more detail what I'm going to speak about today. So we've got information about the documents that you're going to need to show, and also about the process of applying for a Tier 4 visa. So I encourage you to look at that webpage when you finally come around to making your visa application. We also have a bit of software there that asks you questions about your financial documents to check to see that they're going to be acceptable. So I'd advise you to use all of those resources when you do apply for Tier 4. This is an overview of what we're going to be talking about in today's presentation. So firstly, we're going to be talking about that process. How do you apply for a Tier 4 visa? And then secondly, we're going to be thinking about where can you apply, what countries do you need to be in when you're applying for this visa? And then secondly, when should I apply for Tier 4? So what kind of date could you start thinking about making the application? And then what documents do I need? So it's quite important that you have the correct documents and they're in the specific format that's needed for this application. We'll tell you all about that. And then how much money will I need to show? So that's probably the biggest question, is always about finances. So we're going to go through that in a lot of detail and explain exactly how much money you need to show and how you have to show that in what format. And we're going to touch a bit on, can I bring my family with me as well? And we're also going to talk a bit about part-time study as well. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions after the presentation. So firstly, we're talking about making the visa application. Who can apply? So to make a Tier 4 application, you need to have an unconditional offer of a place of study at SOAS. So it's not conditional. You've passed all the conditions. Maybe you needed to get English language score, or maybe you needed to pass a qualification that you're studying at the moment. You've met the conditions. You've been given an unconditional offer, and you can request from SOAS a thing called a CAS, a confirmation of acceptance for studies. And that is a document that shows that you have a place here at SOAS and that we've agreed to sponsor your visa. So the visa itself needs 40 points. 30 points are for that thing called CAS, the confirmation of acceptance for studies. And then 10 points are for what's called maintenance. And really that's what we call money. So 10 points to show that you have the right amount of funds in the bank to support yourself while you're studying here. Okay, so the next one is, how do I apply? The way that you do this, it's all online. You use an online application system that's I'm going to give you the links to later on in our guidance. And then what do you have to do? You have to pay a thing called the Immigration Health Surcharge, which is £300 per year of study. Okay, and you also pay a little bit for the 6 month or 4 month, any extra period under 6 months, you'll pay an extra 150 quid for. So if you're coming for a year, say to do a master's program, you're going to be granted 4 months at the end, and for that period you'll pay an extra 150 quid. So in total, for a master's program, you'll be paying 450 quid. So the Immigration Health Surcharge, that covers the cost of any NHS treatment you need when you come to the UK. It also allows you to visit a doctor at any time without any further charges. Then secondly, you need to pay the application fee. So there's a fee of £348, or the local equivalent. That's the 15 working day process. So if you pay that amount, you should get your visa in 3 weeks. If you need to travel quite quickly, or you want your visa in your hand quite quickly, you can pay £568 or local equivalent, and then you get your visa in 5 working days, so 1 week. Once you've paid those fees, you're going to need to upload your supporting documents electronically. Then you attend a biometric appointment, and that appointment you'll be given your fingerprints and a photograph of your face will be taken. You'll also be interviewed via Skype, so it'll be like a webinar. You'll be but you'll be looking at somebody down a Skype line and asking some very basic questions about why you wanted to study at SOAS, and you know, what your future plans are, that sort of thing. Nothing to be worried about. They're very, very simple questions. And then, depending on what country you're from, you may be required to provide a TB test as well. And there's a list of those countries on the gov.uk website that you can quite easily find. And once you've done that, the next question is, where can you apply for this visa? So normally the expectation would be that you apply in your country of nationality. Okay, now there are exceptions to that. If you are from a country, and then if you're studying maybe for a period of time in a third country, and you have a student visa to be in that country, then you could make your tier 4 application in that third country. Okay, so you could apply there and then come straight from that country to the UK. Generally, if you have a visa to be in another country that isn't a visitor or tourist visa, so if you're there as a student or maybe a worker, that visa would allow you to apply there. But if you're just on holiday in another country, you probably won't be able to apply there. Okay, so generally your country nationality, but if you're living somewhere else and you're actually there doing something like study or work, you can apply in that other country. And then at the end of the application, you book your appointment. There'll be instructions about where to go for your appointment. As I said, you do your biometrics and your interview, and then you're issued with a 30-day vignette. And a vignette is a little sticker that goes in your passport, and that will be issued 30 days in advance of the day that you said you want to travel to the United Kingdom. Okay, and that gives you plenty of chance to get to the UK in that period of time. And then once you're in the UK, you can collect your biometric residence permit. That's your visa. It's on a plastic card and it's got a chip in it, and on that chip are all the details of your biometrics, so your fingerprints, and also the picture of your face is also digitized on there. So next, when should you apply? Well, you can start applying for this visa up to 3 months before your program start date. Okay, to do that you'll need a CAS, but it's important to think about things before you sort of dive into making the application. Your CAS will say that we've given you an offer, so as we've given you an offer based on maybe some previous study that you've done, or maybe the fact that you've got an IELTS score of a certain amount, and you may need documents to prove these things. So if you need those documents, they're going to be listed in the CAS, and the CAS will be sent to you as an email. So you just read through that and it will say evidence used. You need to provide those documents, or you need to upload those documents as part of your application. So you can't apply before you've got all those documents in your hand. And then the other important thing is to make sure you meet the financial requirements before you make your tier 4 application as well. And so some key things are to remember that you do those things before you pay online and submit your application, but we're going to cover all of that in this webinar. Okay, so what documents do you need to make the application? Well, you need a valid passport. The passport doesn't need to be valid for the whole duration of your program in the United Kingdom, but it needs to be valid on the day that you apply, but I suppose ideally valid long enough for you to get to the UK. At some stage, once you're in the UK, you could apply for a new passport from your embassy. You know, if it's going to expire in a couple of weeks, probably a good idea to get a new one before you come. And then you need that document we've talked quite a lot about, the confirmation of acceptance for studies, the CAS. And as I've mentioned, you need the qualifications listed in that CAS as well. So maybe it's a previous maybe it's an English qualification, whatever it says, you're going to need those and have to be ready to upload those. So yeah, sort of jumping ahead. So yes, English would be one of those things that you may need to prove, but you know, you may not as well. So check your CAS statement. And then a very key part of this process is proof of maintenance, so showing that you've got the right amount of money. Now, there are groups of different people from different nationalities who are classed as low-risk nationals. Sometimes that's referred to as differentiation. Now, if you're from one of those countries, although you need to provide these documents that we've discussed above, maintenance, qualifications, etc., you don't actually need to show them, but what you are doing is you're ticking a box on the form to say that you have them. So it's probably safest to prepare all of those documents, but just not to submit them, because they can be requested at a later date, and they are sometimes requested. So especially proof of maintenance, you're ticking a box to say that you've got the right amount of money. It's a good idea to have that money and have it held for the right amount of time, or there's just it's going to be requested and you won't be able to show it, and your visa may be refused. So how much money do I need to show? Well, this looks very complicated, but don't worry, it's not too bad. If your program is more than 8 months long, so if it's a degree program, you're going to need to show £11,385. Okay, and that's what's considered by UK Visas Immigration to be the amount of money you need for the first year. Okay, if your course is longer than a year, you don't need to show any more money. That's the maximum that you need to show, but obviously that's a reasonable amount of money. Now, if your program's shorter than 8 months, then you need to show, and sorry, I didn't mention the first one. For any application, you also need to show that you've paid the full fees, or that you have the full fees in the bank. And then for a course that's less than 8 months in length, you'll need to show that you've got £1,265 for each month or partial month. So if your course was, say, 3.5 months long, you'd need to show that you had £1,265 for 4 months. Okay, so you have to round up. And we're talking about the fees. If you've already paid the fees to SOAS when you apply for your visa and they're shown as paid on your CAS, then you don't need to show that money in the bank. Okay, otherwise you need to show that money has been held in the bank with your 11,385, or the right amount of money for you. And then if you're getting a loan, and it's an official loan from your government, and you've got letters to prove that, that will be sufficient. You don't have to have that money in the bank, as long as that's an official educational loan that will be disbursed to you on arrival in the UK. And maybe you're getting a loan that doesn't quite cover your costs, or maybe you're getting a scholarship as well. So if you're getting a scholarship, it's quite similar. You can have a letter that proves that. You don't have to have the money in the bank, as long as you have an official scholarship letter from that scholarship agency. And there are rules about this. We should go into more detail in our guidance, but if that scholarship or those loans don't cover the full fees and maintenance, then you need to show the remainder amount in the bank account. Okay, and the money that you use, that can be your money, or it can be one of your parents' money in their bank account. If you're using a parent's account, you'll need to get permission for that from them, like a written letter giving permission to use the money. And also you'll need to provide a scan or upload of your birth certificate, your original birth certificate, to prove your relationship. And any funds that you use, so you're showing the full fees and you're showing the 11,385, all that money has to be held in the bank for at least 28 days before the date you apply, or held by your parents 28 days. So just bear that in mind. You can't just have the money in the bank for 2 days. It's got to be there for basically a month, or at least 28 days before you apply. Now, can I study part-time? This is relatively new, but under Tier 4, we do have what's called a Tier 4 part-time route. Now, things to bear in mind about this are it's only of use to postgrad. You can't study an undergrad program using this visa. Also, you're not allowed to work part-time at all. The work is completely prohibited. So I think some people might think, oh yeah, great, I'll study part-time and then I can work part-time. But unfortunately, on the part-time visa, you're not going to be able to work at all. So that's really important to bear in mind. Also, a bit more of a complex issue that we won't get too into, but there are limits on how long you can spend studying at different levels of study for your visa. So a D level, for instance, that's undergrad and masters. There's a 5 or 6 year limit to that, depending on the length of your undergrad. If you're studying, say, your master's part-time over 2 years, that's going to extend the length of some of that study. You may find that you're limited in how much study you can do in the UK if you study part-time. And the other thing to remember is you can't bring family members with you as dependents. So yes, part-time study it's available, but it's fairly restrictive. So it's good to bear those restrictions in mind if you're thinking about studying part-time at SOAS next year on Tier 4. Finally, can I bring my family with me? So you can if you're on a full-time postgrad program of 9 months or more in length, or if you're a government-sponsored student and your program is longer than 6 months. And who qualifies as a family member? Your husband, your wife, or your unmarried partner, or a child under 18. And if it's your unmarried partner, you're going to need to be able to show that you've been living together as if you were married for a 2-year period before you make the visa application. And the amount of money that your dependents or family members would need to show is a bit less. So for a program over 8 months in length, it's £7,605. Or if it's less than 8 months, it's £845 per month. So that's really the end of the presentation. So if you use all the guidance and hopefully you've gained a lot from this, then we look forward to seeing you at SOAS in September. So I hope that's been useful. But as I said, I'm sticking around now. So if you've got any questions, please let me know and I'll answer as many as I can. So somebody's saying, is the IHS £400? So the IHS is the Immigration Health Surcharge, the cost of the NHS. That's £400 for workers, but it's £300 for students. So it's slightly less. It's still gone up quite a lot recently, unfortunately. Another question is saying, can I apply for a CAS as I wait for results of my scholarship? Well, yes, you can. But if you're relying on the scholarship to study in the United Kingdom, it might be a good idea to wait until you've got your funding in place before you get the CAS, because you won't be able to apply for the Tier 4 visa unless you have the full fees and the 11,385. And somebody said, can you work full-time, or can you work on a full-time Tier 4 visa? That's a good question we didn't really touch on. So yes, you can work 20 hours per week during term time, and then you can work full-time during vacations. For instance, if you're an undergrad, you can work full-time over the summer period. If you're a master's student, you can work full-time over Christmas and Easter, but the summer is your dissertation period. So for scholarship funding, the question here is saying, what do I need to show in my account? So you don't need to show any money in your account, but what you do need is a letter, and it needs to meet the guidance for an official scholarship letter. So you've got a scholarship from an international company or an official scholarship agency, okay, and then they're stating how much money they're going to give you for what period of time, and that it's going to cover the whole duration of your program, or if there is a limit to that, they're also going to mention that, okay. And then somebody's saying they've got an unconditional offer which they've accepted and already paid the £1,000 deposit. How do I obtain my CAS? Well, you can request your CAS from Masters Admissions at SOAS. That's an email address you can contact, but it's quite early for a CAS to be issued. Normally they'll be issued around the time that you can start applying, maybe a little bit before that, but so I would say at the earliest, probably the beginning of June. And somebody said, does my partner have the same fees for the visa and the immigration health surcharge? That's a really good question, and the answer is yes. So if you're studying a master's program and you want to get your CAS, you can email mastersadmissions@soas.ac.uk for a postgraduate CAS or for a master's CAS. Somebody said, where do you find out if you're from a low risk country? So the easiest place probably to look for that is Appendix H of the immigration rules, which is on the gov.uk website in the UK. So if you were to just go to that website, and that's www.gov.uk, and then type in Appendix H, like the appendix that you have removed sometimes, and that's a list of all those countries, and that's just been, some countries have just been added to that list, which is great news. And somebody's applying from Taiwan. They're asking if you apply online for the Tier 4 visa to a general entity or specific entity in Taiwan. So yeah, that's a good question. The process of local visa application is outsourced by the British government. Often it's a company called VFS Global that deal with this. I think in Taiwan it probably will be VFS. So you'll start off at the gov.uk website, the links we will provide in our guidance, or they're available in our guidance. But then if you choose the country that you're applying in, you'll be sort of shipped off to that local provider, which in a lot of cases will be VFS Global, but there may be other ones too. But you know, if you're taken there from Link, it's quite safe to continue with those people. We have a question about how long after my program will my visa expire? That will be 4 months after your program ends if it's a degree program of a year or more in length, and that allows you to work full time in that 4 month period. Also, can I get employed in the UK during my studies or graduation? It's a bit of a complex question. I mean, yes, you can do part-time work. If you're thinking about working after your degree, I think that's something for another day, and it's something that we'll talk to you about when you're here as a student. The rules around that are changing quite often. To be honest, they're getting relaxing a little bit in the sort of past year or two, so that it could be good news for when you're coming towards the middle or the end of your degree. Another question is asking about self-employment and about part-time work. So you can't be self-employed while you're a student on before. Okay, you can only work for an employer, and you can work up to 20 hours per week during term time and full-time during vacations and after your program's ended. I believe the links to the presentation will be put onto YouTube in the fullness of time, and then it will be sent out to anybody that's attended. And also we can include a link for our guidance as well that I refer to in the webinar. So we have a question about a 1-year master's program from September 2019 to June 2020. So if the program end date, if it's more than a year long and it's degree level, which that is, and it ends in June 2020, then the visa will be expiring in September 2020. I think that's right. So June, July, August, September. So 4 months later. If it's a 1-year program, so it's September to September, the visa expires in January of the year after. So if it's September 19 to September 20, the visa will expire in January 21. Somebody's asking a question about working from home. I think if in doubt, it's a good idea to go to the UKISA website for advice about what types of work are allowed, and they go into a lot of detail there. UKISA is ukcisa.org, and that website has a lot of information for international students about things like working in the United Kingdom whilst you're here on a Tier 4 visa. And we've got some questions about, can I stay after graduation? Depending on when you graduate, really, it's going to have some impact. So if you're an undergrad and you're finishing in around about June, then you will be graduating that year, I think in July. But if you're a master's student and your visa expires in the January, you'll be graduating the next year because your results will come out in December. So then you'll need to come back to the UK perhaps as a visitor to attend your graduation. So if you're studying a master's program and it's a 1-year program, just to go over this again. So a master's program from September 2019 to September 2020, that will give you a visa until January 2021. It will give you 4 months at the end. So as long as your degree program is more than 1 year in length, you'll always get 4 months after the course end date of visa validity. And in that time, you could be working full time, or, you know, of course, you can leave the UK. It's entirely up to you. Somebody's asking if there's a difference between an MPhil and a PhD application. I'm not really the right person to answer that question. So what I'd suggest you do is send an email to doctoral school admissions, which I think is ds.admissions@soas.ac.uk, and they should be able to answer that for you. The 4 months that you're granted at the end of your visa for your program, that's automatic. You don't have to apply for that. It happens because you're applying for a program of 1 year in length. You'll just get the 4 months automatically given. If you're not given the 4 months, come and see us as soon as you can, or even get in touch with us before you arrive, and we will tell you how to deal with that. I mean, if you see that you've got your visa without the 4 months and your course is more than a year in length, you can ask the people that issued that in your home country to change it. But if you get to the UK and it's wrong, we can tell you how to do that. And there's a question about what reasons would there be why you'd be denied a visa or why your application would be refused. The most common one is to do with finances. So it's the fact that you haven't got either the right amount of money in the bank or that you haven't held it for the right period of time, or that you haven't shown it in the correct way. So we've touched quite a lot on that in this webinar, but also our guidance goes into even more detail about that. So hopefully we can avoid anybody getting a visa refusal. Somebody's asking if getting a visa from a particular country is difficult. Theoretically, it shouldn't be difficult. It's a points-based system, okay? And I would say we haven't really seen refusals that are for any reasons other than accurate ones from any particular countries, if that makes any sense. So as long as you meet the requirements and you provide all the documents that are needed, then you should be able to get a visa. If you're refused and it's not a reasonable refusal, then you can get in touch with us and we'll look at helping you make a thing called an administrative review, which is where you challenge the decision because the decision is not based on the immigration law of the United Kingdom. But there isn't a trend for that happening. But, you know, there are definitely people who get refusals because the documents are just incorrect and the amount of money is incorrect. So another question is asking if you receive a scholarship and your visa is refused, can you communicate and get help? Yes, we could definitely help with that. But I've said it already, but I'm going to keep saying it. Look at our guidance, watch this webinar again, make sure you've got everything you need before you apply for the visa, okay? If your documents are not quite right or anything is not quite right, don't apply, and get advice before you do it, okay? Another question is asking if your partner can work part-time, okay, and what will their visa be? So if you're applying as a dependent, that your partner or spouse will have a Tier 4 dependent visa. It's called PBS dependent. It's a different visa. It allows full-time work actually, and there are very few restrictions on the kind of work that a dependent partner can do. So it's more permissive than Tier 4, but I guess that there's no expectation of you seeing. You're just in the UK as somebody's partner or child. Yeah, we're going to send a link round to the guidance. So that's when we send the link for the Prezi round. We're also going to send a link for the guidance. But remember, if you watch the film back of the Prezi on YouTube, you're going to see the URL there as well. But we'll send it around. It's a bit clunky to put into the chat there, but we'll make sure that you will get that. And then I'd sort of urge you to have a look at that and start thinking about it as soon as possible. Watch the Prezi back and start thinking about what documents you're going to need and how you're going to make your Tier 4 application so that you're well ready to do it. Okay, so thanks so much for coming, and all the questions have been really good, and I hope hope some questions have helped other people that are listening. And I'm just about to sign out, but I think a couple more of you are typing, so thank you to all of you saying thanks as well. It's nice to do this. Probably do it again, but this, as far as we know, nothing much is going to change between now and September. The changes have already been announced. So thank you very much. Thanks for attending, and see you all at SOAS.